Okay, everybody,
Okay.
thanks for being here. And we're super excited about this continuation of, our queen of all things dementia care, Kathi Miracle. That really is her last name, for those of you that don't know her. So if that's not a glowing endorsement for what the kind of work she does, I don't know what is. She's pretty wonderful. She is one of the best resources we have when it comes to understanding dementia care, and what's needed in order to take care of your loved ones. So feel free at any time to drop a question in the chat if you need to, or just raise your hand. But Kathy's got a lot of information to cover, and I'm going to be her assistant and scroll through her slides for her. And without further ado, Kathi Miracle, she's our Executive Director for Balfour at Cherrywood Village.
Thank you so much, Louise. I tell you, as much as I've learned about technology in 2020, and I think the famous line on for Zoom calls and Teams calls is "you're on mute" or "I can't hear you." I think as many times as I listened to that or somebody has said it to me, somebody needs to make a bumper sticker or something. They'd make so much money. So thank you all very much for attending this. One of my favorite things that I have done in my career has been able to train and educate, whether it's one-on-one with families or to be able to speak to audiences, to educate on various topics, dementia obviously being my passion. And I get asked to do this so many times, but I break it down because dementia is such a huge, huge topic. And so tonight we're going to give a little bit of an overview on dementia, but we're going to focus a lot on communication tips. One of the things that we find throughout someone's dementia journey is the challenges that people have in being able to communicate with someone. It definitely how we communicate with someone and how they're able to process language and speech and communicate back and interact with their loved ones obviously is a roller coaster, and it's very challenging. So we're going to talk a little bit about why it's challenging and what happens so people can better understand that, and then talk about some strategies and offer some tips, and hopefully you'll walk away with a little bit better understanding and some helpful hints on how you can better interact with those in your life who are traveling this dementia journey. Okay.
Great. And can everybody see the big blue screen that says communication tips? Awesome. Awesome. Thanks, Eric. You're not really Eric. I don't think your name's Eric, but that's okay.
And if at any time you have questions, please put them in the chat and we can answer them. Because a lot of times your question is probably relevant to the information that we're covering. So go ahead and put them in the chat and we can cover those along the way. And of course, we'll have time for questions at the end.
Great. Thank you. All right, Kathi, I'm going to scroll to the next slide. Here we go. Let's see if I can do this without, oh, there we go.
Okay, so kind of what we're going to cover is a quick overview of what dementia is, understanding why communication changes through the dementia journey, communication challenges, and then strategies for successful communication, and the kind of questions at the end. So what is dementia? So in simplicity, this is a general term for loss of memory, language, problem solving, and other thinking abilities that are severe enough that interfere with daily life.
Okay.
And basically, this picture actually comes directly off the Alzheimer's website. You can find it at alz.org. So dementia is a big umbrella. There's actually approximately 128 different types of dementia. 7 of those are pediatric, and there's over 400 subcategories of dementia. So it's a big, huge topic. Underneath the big umbrella of dementia, you can find several different types. Alzheimer's is your most common form, making up for 60 to 80% of diagnoses. You find Lewy bodies, vascular, and then you go into mixed dementias. And so it can go, the list can kind of go on and on and on and on. When when we look at what we care for in assisted living, we don't take care of 128 different types of dementia. I can assure you we do not. We take care of the big ones like Alzheimer's, Lewy bodies, vascular, frontal temporal. We just take care of kind of the big ones. But just so people can understand, because a lot of times I get asked what's the difference between dementia and Alzheimer's. And so just like if someone asked you what kind of dog do you have, dog is your big umbrella. The breed of dog, whether that's a golden retriever, a Shih Tzu, a Yorkie, that's where you get into your specifics. So that's kind of the same thing. Dementia is your big umbrella. Then you get into your types of dementia.
Okay.
So how does communication work? That also can be very complicated and an entire presentation on itself. So there's actually several areas of the brain, which we call the language center, where how communication works. It's both speech processing and production. It's composes of the hearing mechanism, the speech mechanism, how it produces, and how we process it. So language involves solving problems, social interaction, how we even attribute symbols to specific concepts. So here's where it gets confusing for families, because they may say, well, you know, with my mom's or dad's dementia or my spouse's dementia, you know, it got worse, but then it got better. Okay, because language is throughout the brain. So like, let me take somebody who may have had a stroke. It may have affected their speech or processing for a while, but because another part of the brain was able to take over that and relearn it, then they got better. And so that's why families get a little confused as to, well, why did they get worse and why did they get better? Well, maybe with Alzheimer's, like the plaques and the tangles destroyed one part of the brain, and then they weren't able to communicate for a while, but another part of the brain took over that and relearned it, and then they got better. So it's why we tell families, or why I educate them, it becomes this roller coaster and it becomes this up and down. And it feels really yucky because you're like, well, are they bad or are they not? Is it time to put them in assisted living or is it not? Are they ready for memory care or are they not? And it just becomes this up and down motion. And so it's frustrating, it's overwhelming, it's exhausting. It just feels like you're spinning out of control. And that's because the language center is completely all over the brain. And that's why we call it the language. It's not, it shouldn't say center, like singular. It's actually throughout the brain.
Wow. Okay. So hang on, let me get to the next one.
So when we look at a healthy brain, which you'll see on the, my left, it says normal. That's what a normal brain looks like. For people when you're born and as you develop, the normal brain looks like this. An Alzheimer's brain, or as we develop even through any kind of dementia, it starts to shrink, it starts to shrivel, and then an Alzheimer's brain starts to look like this. And the reason I talk a little bit about the brain is, I started learning, and in my career, once I started better understanding the brain, how it functions normally, and then what happens with every single different type of dementia started making a whole heck of a lot more sense to me. And it helped me understand why behaviors happen, what happens throughout the communication patterns, why people with dementia process things the way they do. And so it really helped me better help families be educated and informed. It helped me train my staff better. So really, to better understand dementia, all centers around helping me understand and helping people understand the brain better. So when you look at it, look at how much you lose when you go from a normal brain to an Alzheimer's brain. And this is why it's really scary when someone falls, because the space between your brain and your skull, there's a lot more space as we age and go through the dementia journey. A really simple exercise is if you were to put an egg like in a glass jar or a Tupperware jar, and when someone falls, just shake it once. See what happens to the egg. Shake it twice. See what happens to the egg. That's what happens to the brain of an individual who has dementia as they age and go through their dementia journey. And why we get concerned about brain bleeds and why we get concerned about people's language and their processing of the language and other things that go along different functions of the brain and why falls can even be serious. And that is also a whole other presentation. But as you can see, the normal brain versus the Alzheimer's brain, when things start shrinking and things start shriveling, their world becomes so much smaller, meaning their language becomes smaller, their communication becomes smaller. And as we talk, and as the tips I give you, and I say, it's why communication your sentences need to become shorter. Your communication needs to become simplified. It takes them longer to process what you're saying. So if you can see why the brain, it goes normal to Alzheimer's and it shrinks, that's why I'm telling you this, is because their brain can no longer process everything it's hearing because of why the brain is shrinking. So why communication changes? In a normal brain, we can have full conversations. We understand what is being said. If you're paying attention, if you're giving somebody full contact. My husband will tell me, put your phone down, put your computer away. Do I have your full attention? So we understand what's being said. We have the ability to form words and speak them. We have the ability to read and write words. Understanding body language. We can interpret somebody's facial expressions, tone of voice. Even when someone's arms are folded, we know that means they're closed off to listening to us, or they're cold, they're hot. We're able to interpret all of those things because it's what we've been taught through the years. You know, if someone's frowning at you, but they're saying, oh no, everything's fine, I'm okay. Are they really okay? Probably not. They're angry, they're frustrated, they don't understand what's being said. Tone of voice. We can tell just by someone's tone of voice if they're okay with the message, if they're angry, if they're frustrated. We can interpret all those things when the brain is normal. When the brain has been damaged, and whether that's through a car accident, a brain injury of some sort, dementia, and really what dementia is brain damage. So wherever that challenges are, what we'll see is they might be repeating familiar words. They describe objects rather than naming them, sort of like if they're trying to describe a watch, they may call it a clock or that thing that tells time. They speak less because their world becomes smaller. Just like I showed you, the brain becomes smaller, so they may speak less. They start isolating themselves, relying on hand motions and gestures more than words. So they might, instead of asking for the salt and pepper, they might point to it on the table because they don't understand that that's a salt or pepper, but they know it's what they want. So they'll point more. Or they know they need to go to the bathroom, so they're pointing down the hallway because they know what direction it's in. They just don't know what it's called anymore. Difficulty finding words. They're searching. They know in their head that the word they want to use, but they use a lot of us or ahs, or they sit there and they're going repeating, or they get frustrated. You can see it on their face. A lot of times I see caregivers, because we're all so busy and we're wanting them to finish that sentence, a lot of times the mistake I see caregivers making is finishing the sentence for them. All that's going to do is trigger a behavior. You're going to make the situation worse. As much as I know it's hard, I would caution you and don't do that. You know, maybe have objects around, like if they're looking for something to eat, have the object there and let them find it on their own. Disorganized speech. Sometimes we call that word salad, where they're saying something is coming out, but it's all jumbled. It's all completely all over the place. And so what we call that is word salad, much like when you put a salad together, there's a bunch of vegetables in there, but it's all mixed together. And so it can be really confusing because they're saying something, they think it makes sense, makes no sense to you. And I've listened to caregivers, spouses specifically, who will say, they're just doing this to make me crazy. No, they're not. They really aren't. It's the damage in their brain, probably in their speech center. They may have had a stroke. in the left parietal lobe, and that's probably why the speech salad is coming out. They no longer have the ability to form the words. They will do better with other communication tips, in which we can kind of get into here in a little bit. So that's where it becomes challenging again for families, because they get really, really frustrated over it. I see word salad happening a lot more with vascular dementia, with strokes, than I do anything else. So effective communication with your loved one will be different at each stage of the dementia journey. And we'll talk about that here in a bit and what that looks like. Each stage of the dementia journey affects each person differently. Thus, communication abilities change and they can become more challenging. Following the tips that we're about to go over can be effective when they're used consistently. So there are actually 7 stages of dementia. 1, 2, and 3 are in the early stage, 4 and 5 are in middle, and 6 and 7 are in late. So stages 1, 2, and 3, and I didn't write this, I'm just presenting it. So we have a joke in my family, because if my husband loses his keys or can't find something, I'll always say, "You are in stage 1 of dementia." And I find it more funny than he does, but stage 1 is actually no dementia. And then I don't know where that came from. You would think that would be stage 0, but it's not. So stage 1 is no dementia. Stage 2 is very mild, and stage 3 is mild cognitive impairment. People who are in these stages can actually, they live independently, they still drive a car, they're still paying their bills. They actually still live their lives very independently in society. And so, and literally people, I've seen people in stage 3 who really do still drive a car out on the roads. And those are the ones who make me a little nervous. But the tip I would give you, if your loved one has been diagnosed with mild cognitive impairment, and those are the individuals where they start repeating their words, or in a 30-minute conversation, they may tell you about their neighbor 3 times in that conversation. And that's where I start seeing children or spouses actually excuse their dementia away, because they'll say, "Mom, is something wrong?" And she'll go, "Oh, you know, I'm just tired. I've had a really busy day." And we go, "Oh, I know, I've had a busy day too." And we almost help excuse it away for weeks, almost months, before all of a sudden a crisis happens. But what I tell you is, when you start seeing those things happen, slow down your communication and just start using shorter sentences. But I would also tell you to start paying a little bit more attention, and how often are they repeating themselves, or how many sticky notes do you see, or because they do leave themselves a lot of sticky notes, a lot of lists. They know something's going on long before you'll actually see a diagnosis. So stages 4 and 5 is where we really start noticing a lot of communication changes. It's moderately cognitive decline or moderately severe cognitive decline. This is where we really do see people more in assisted living, memory care. What I would tell you is that definitely it takes a lot of creativity, and sometimes more than one attempt. This is where I see a lot more hand gestures. I see people who definitely are repeating questions, like, "What time is dinner? What time is dinner? What time is dinner?" And this is where families get a lot more frustrated with an individual. They will tell you they don't always know what day it is, what season it is. I have done a lot of cognitive tests over the years. There's so many cognitive tests out there. So I will tell you, there's not like a really, what's the best cognitive test out there. Doctors and even myself who do them, it has a lot to do with preferences. But when I do these, a lot of times when I see people who are being repetitive in anything, language, skills, or like they can't remember things, in these stages, what I will tell families is I will tell them shorter sentences, Don't give them a lot of information all at once. They get very frustrated, and really all they're hearing from an instruction standpoint is the first one or two things that you said to them. If you told your loved one, could you go outside in the outside refrigerator and get me a Pepsi and then come back in and fill a glass with ice and pour it in there? The only thing that person just heard you say is, could you go outside to the garage and open the refrigerator? And then you're done. And they may come back in and they may have brought you a hammer or something else. And you're like, what did you just hear me say? Because they never heard you say any of the rest. It's too much information for them. So breaking things down in very small steps. I find it easy, like when I'm helping a resident and let's say it's time for them to go to the bathroom. It's just easy to say, hi, can you stand up? Can you take my hand? Can we go for a walk? And it's a lot easier to give them those kind of step-by-step instructions and help them be successful in each step-by-step and slow things down for them than to give them 5 things at once when all they heard you say was the first 1 or 2. So here's some really good tips. So short sentences. And when I say lower your voice, a lot of times, and I even have to remind staff in the buildings that I go train in or my own buildings that I've run as an executive director, as a lot of times staff have good intentions, families have really good intentions, but talking louder to somebody who may have a hearing impairment does not help because what they think is that you're yelling at them. One of the things that can happen through the dementia journey, and I've watched this through the years, is that part of the dementia journey is they may actually have damage in the temporal lobe. And so it may not be the hearing mechanism that's damaged. We all may have some hearing loss as we grow older. But what I find is talking louder to them does not help. Lowering your voice like a DJ on a radio helps a lot. So what I find is if I slow down my speech and I just lower my voice and talk a little louder, to them, if they're still having some challenges hearing what I'm saying, chances are that the dementia has damaged the temporal lobe. It has nothing to do with the hearing mechanism. And you can buy the most expensive hearing aids in the world, the most high technology hearing aids, and it's still never going to fix the damage to the temporal lobe. And so that means that you're going to have to find a different way to communicate with that individual. It doesn't always happen, but it's a good test. So, but if you shorten your sentences, lower your voice like a DJ on a radio, you're going to have a lot more success than if you're just sitting there yelling at them. Oddly enough, and my mom did not believe me, but when she started complaining about my dad not listening to her, men happen to lose one of the first decibels they lose hearing is right where women's voices are. And so if you're talking at that decibel, that's where men's hearing loss it first hits. And so women, if your husband is not listening to you, just lower your voice a little bit. They can hear you at that decibel. They probably can't hear you at the decibel that you're talking to them at. Hand gestures. And what I mean by that is when I'm talking to residents, I might say, can you stand up for me? Can you come with me? Let's go this way. Do you want something to eat? Do you want something to drink? So I'm using simple hand gestures sometimes when I'm talking to them, and that sometimes helps. Not always, but sometimes. Positive facial expressions, body language, and again, tone of voice. I will tell you, especially in this stage and later stages, people in memory care, people with different types of dementia, they will watch your body language and they will watch your facial expression and they will listen to your tone of voice long before they actually listen to the words that you're saying. So I tell my staff, if you're approaching them with a frown on your face, they're already not you don't look friendly, so they don't want to listen to anything you say. If you approach them and your voice sounds really gruff, you have to be careful when you're lowering your voice. But if your voice already sounds a little gruff or angry, they're not going to listen to anything you say. So you got to be a little careful. Your body language has to be a little open. You can't stand there with your arms crossed. So you have to be careful of those things, because you'll put them on the defense, and they're going to defend their personal space, and they're going to defend themselves because they feel like they might be being attacked. So be very careful in those areas when you're communicating with someone with a form of dementia. One of my great success things is using pictures. And if you're going to use them a lot, like of the bathroom or of food or something to drink, I would tell you to laminate them. Ones that I've been successful is if they're 5x7s or 8x10s, especially if you're going to use them a lot. Because as we age, people do develop cataracts, glaucoma, macular degeneration. Sometimes don't put them on white sheets. It's easier to put them on kind of a pale yellow. Studies have shown as we age, it's easier to see things on pale yellow. If you are going to put them on white sheets, make them colorful. Don't use black and white. So have them laminated, and especially for someone who, if the lowering your voice, that they have temporal damage, then pictures are wonderful to use. You can say, are you hungry? Do you need something to drink? Do you want to go for a walk outside? You can use different pictures that they will relate to, and it's a wonderful way to be able to communicate with them, and it lowers your stress and anxiety, and it's easier for them, especially if they get into the word salad and they're having a hard time communicating. They can point to the pictures easier than they can to try to communicate. People who've had a stroke, it's also easier for them to communicate through pictures than it can trying to communicate verbally. Written language is also another great way to be able to communicate with individuals in these stages. There is somewhat of a myth that if they can't communicate verbally, then they can't read and write. That's not true. And the reason why it's not true, just like I said, your communication center is throughout your brain. How you communicate verbally and how you communicate reading and writing are two separate parts of the brain. So somebody may have a stroke and they can no longer communicate verbally, but they can still read and write, because that part of the brain has not been damaged at all. I had a resident who, she had a difficult time communicating verbally, but she could read our sign that said hold for 15 seconds on our emergency doors. So she would, and she would escape right out of the building. And that, obviously, we found out she could definitely read. And so just understand those are two different parts of the brain. So you can already have messages pre-written. Again, try to laminate them, and then people can just choose, like, I'm now hungry, or I want to do this, or I need to go to the bathroom. And they can go through those written languages ahead of time, and it's easier for you and them to communicate. It doesn't mean they have to always write, or you always have to write. Sometimes if you have big letters laminated and then they can put words together, it takes a little bit longer, but again, it's less stress than trying to figure out what they're trying to say, and you are trying to figure out and they're trying to talk. That just adds a whole lot of frustration and confusion and raises stress and anxiety for everybody involved. Music, it's one of the last things I do use in communication. However, it has been successful in some things that I've used, because if anybody knows who Mel Tillis is, Mel Tillis, if he tried to talk, would stutter. But once he got up on stage and started singing, he could sing beautifully without a stutter at all in his communication. So there have been some things that I've actually created songs and sang something to somebody, and they could sing to me, but they couldn't talk to me. Music is a calmer and it's a soother for people. So if they start getting anxious or they start getting a little frustrated, just putting on calming music, because again, music touches a different sense and it touches a different part of our brain. And so there are times when I've sang a message to a resident and they've been able to understand it, and they've just kind of, sang a little bit, back to me, but it's a way of opening up a processing center in the brain for them to receive a message in a different way than just verbally talking to them. So it's usually a last resort, but it can work. So stages 6 and 7 are our later stages with people with dementia. They can be a little more challenging just because people tend to be closer to the end of their journey. So this is when we are in severe cognitive decline and very severe cognitive decline. At these stages, your communication needs to be incredibly simplified. I usually try to use 1 or 2 words with people. I make sure that I have minimal distractions. I make sure that I definitely have eye contact. So again, only a few words at a time, very slow, again, lowering my voice. Pictures I've used, I've laminated them. My gestures are really slow. So if I'm going to ask them to come with me, I'm usually not saying come with me. I'm usually saying, can you come with me? And I'm only doing 1 or 2 gestures this way. Or if I'm saying, can you help get up? And I might use both of my hands this time. I also might help them more. I might stabilize them more using very simple pressure. One of the things that's really been successful is this is the most sensitive part of our bodies, is right around our mouths. The second most sensitive part of our bodies is the palm of our hand. So a lot of times when I'm interacting with someone who is in a stage 6 or 7, I'll get a hold of their hand and I'll just barely pump it once or twice. And they'll turn and look at me because they know like something's going on. And I'll smile at them and just get their attention first before I start talking to them. Because they may not know where the communication's coming from because their brain is at a point where it's really shrunk. And so if you've ever had a really bad migraine, you really you don't want to be in a car with kids in rush hour traffic, right? You want to be in a bed with your head in pillows in the dark. It's kind of the closest thing I can tell you for somebody with dementia is their brain is trying to process every sound it hears. And so when you're trying to communicate with people as they go through their dementia journey, especially in 6 and 7, as minimal distractions as you can have, and you make sure that you have their attention by pumping their hand, then they'll turn towards you and you can try to put them in a quiet environment or with as minimal distractions as possible so they can pay attention to what you're trying to say to them. And if they really kind of start wandering, because that's what they'll start doing, because their brain now is processing somebody having a conversation over here, or somebody dropped something over here, and they'll turn to wherever the brain has now got their attention because it's just trying to process every little sound that it's hearing. A lot of times when families have moved people into my memory care, they'll say, can we still take them out to dinner? Not during COVID right now, but I usually will say, well, please don't take them to Chili's at 6 o'clock on Friday night, or please don't ever take them to Texas Roadhouse. And it's because even in stages 4 and 5, and definitely in these stages, they walk into a very overstimulating environment. And it's just like, if you walk into somewhere very loud, close your eyes for a minute. How many sounds are you listening to? For us with a normal brain, we can block out all of those sounds. For these individuals, as they progress through their dementia journey, and especially when they get to this point, they no longer have the ability to filter and block out those sounds. Their brain is just going to go bing, 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 bing. And so it's very difficult for them to be able to block out all of that. So that's why it's important, only a few words at a time. Pictures are very great. Your gestures are very minimal and very slow. And once again, the music may be able to help keep them calm, and it may be able to help them process something. but again, it's a last resort. So these are things that I have people remember when they're communicating with somebody with dementia. And again, it's important as they progress through their dementia journey. Make sure that you're maintaining eye contact as best as possible. And you'll know kind of, and I've watched people with dementia, as I'm sitting there trying to talk to them, and I'll hear like a conversation or somebody laugh, and they'll turn like this, like some of us will do. If we're sitting in a restaurant and we hear somebody drop a tray, a lot of times we turn because it's like, oh, we caught our attention. If you watch somebody with dementia, if you're in an overstimulated environment, how many times do they turn their head? And it's because their brain is processing. So as much as you can try to keep them in a quiet environment, but maintain eye contact, your communication with them will be so much more successful. Again, minimize distractions. Find quiet places to communicate. It improves the success of your communication. I always tell people, if you're going to approach somebody to communicate with them, now if it's an emergency, approach as fast as you need to. They fell, you got to get to them. But if you're just trying to have a conversation, the best way to approach somebody is from a 45-degree angle. That is how they can see you the best. Sometimes, I've seen people tell people approach right in front of them. You can, but if they've got cataracts or glaucoma or macular degeneration, they somewhat have a blind spot. So that's why I always say approach from a 45-degree angle. Never approach somebody from behind. That is a blind spot for them, and chances are you will startle them. And if you startle them, then it's going to, increase their anxiety, and it's going to increase their stress. Depending on the type of dementia that somebody has and where they're at in their journey. For you or I, if we get startled, my kids, when they were a little younger, they could hear me come home through the garage. They loved hiding. And as soon as I walked in the house, they'd jump out and scare me. And okay, I'm scared. And for me to come back down to baseline, it maybe took me 10, 15, 20 minutes. Somebody cuts you off on the road, could be angry about it hours later, but from being startled, 10, 15, 20, 30 minutes. For somebody with dementia, for them to be startled, they get awake wrong, you approach them from behind and you startle them, depending on the type of dementia they have and where they're at in their journey, it can take anywhere from 8 to 16 hours for them to come back down to baseline. So good luck trying to have any kind of communication or successful communication with them during that time. So don't ever approach them from behind. 45-degree angle is always the best. Speak slowly and clearly and avoid multi-step instructions. Stages 1, 2, and 3, they can handle multi-step instructions, but as they progress through that journey, I would slow it down and only 1 to 2, maybe 3 instructions at any given time. So avoid open-ended questions. What do you want for dinner tonight? Opening up the closet, what would you like to wear? Those type of open-ended questions, they don't know. They get lost in those types of questions. It's easier to say, would you like pork or chicken for dinner? Do you want to wear the green shirt or the blue shirt? Giving them very simple. You still want to give them choices. You still want them to feel independent, that they can still have some control in their world. But just even opening up a menu, what sounds good to you? If we're going to Chili's for dinner, what sounds good to you? It's too much for them. So again, simplifying their world, giving them 2 choices helps them still be able to communicate, interact. They still have some control, and they still can make a decision. Avoid yes or no questions. Human behavior, people will tend to answer no first. Are you hungry? No. Do you want to go to bed? No. Are you in pain? No. It's going to typically be your answer. So try to avoid yes or no. It's easier to say, it's time to eat, let's go. You typically say, let's go use the bathroom. You're usually going to get no. I just usually say, How let's go for a walk. Come with me. We just happen to end up at the bathroom is usually what I try to do. So yes or no questions are not good ways. You're just going to end up getting a no. I would avoid arguing, criticizing, or correcting. It ends up becoming a tug of war. I can assure you the person with dementia usually wins. So I've had people who the cotton is falling from the trees, and I see people say, oh, it's snowing outside. And I hear my staff or a family will say, no, that's cotton. No, it's not, it's snow. And now we've gotten into a tug of war. So I tell families, I tell staff, talk about the topic. So if the person's saying it's snowing outside, I'm like, oh, well, what's the biggest snowstorm you've ever been in? And we talk about building snowman and making snow angels, and mom used to make cocoa and chocolate chip cookies, and we talk about the topic. If they're saying, you know, right now it's almost nighttime, I need to go home and tend to my children. Well, the children are all grown and they don't really need to get home. Oh, really? Well, what did you used to do when you used to take care of your children? Did you, make good dinners for them? How many children did you have? And so it just talk about the topic with them, try to, redirect them. It doesn't always work, but it works a lot of the time. So try to avoid as much as you can those three things and getting into a tug of war with them. Try not to pull away from the conversation. I know it's really difficult. It's very frustrating, it's overwhelming, it's exhausting. But as much as you can, try to just end a conversation with somebody instead of just pulling away and walking away. Because the person with dementia, this is a disease. They don't understand. In their mind, they're doing what they believe is correct and they can rationalize it. They really don't understand, and I can assure you they're not doing it to drive anyone crazy, but they don't understand what's going on. So you pulling away from them or you walking away in frustration can actually trigger a behavior. So try to just as best you can wrap up a conversation and then just kind of then walk away as best as you can. And not all communication is verbal, just like we talked about. Some can be music. A lot of it can be pictures. Pre-written phrases or sentences is always very helpful. And hugs go a long way. Hand massages and touch go a long way. If you look at Maslow's hierarchy of needs, just the base of that pyramid is food, water, shelter, and human touch. And so, like I said, not all communication is verbal. Sometimes just sitting with someone and holding their hand goes a long way. And most importantly, what I will tell families all the time is don't forget to laugh. Find those silver lining moments. Create as many memories as you can. This is a very difficult journey. I've never seen it be an easy journey for anyone. And so there are a lot of what I call silver lining moments throughout this journey. So don't forget to laugh and enjoy the person that you have with you. Your loved one is a very special and unique individual. And so don't forget to laugh. Are there any questions that I can answer?
Kathi, is one question in the chat. What do you mean by pumping the hand?
Okay. Let me try to I wish I was live. I could come and show people. But if you take their hand and all you have to do is just squeeze it. Like squeeze it once or squeeze it twice. And it will get their attention. A lot of times I will massage it. I will take my hands too and just take my thumbs and I'll massage the palm of the hand. And that also gets their attention as well.
Hi, Kathi. I am Wendy, not Eric. You're correct.
Hi.
Hi. I was wondering if you could maybe speak just a little bit more about when they're confused and like maybe when they're more independent to assisted living. What are some of the things that they need to know? Or maybe when they're more independent to assisted living, what are some of the things that they need to know? Or maybe when they're more independent to assisted living, what are some of the things that they need to know? Or maybe when they're more independent to assisted living, what are some of the things that they need to know? Or maybe when they're more independent to assisted living, what are some of the things that they need to know? Or maybe when they're more independent to assisted living, what are some of the things that they need to know? Or maybe when they're more independent to assisted living, what are some of the things that they need to know? Or maybe when they're more independent to assisted living, what are some of the things that they need to know? Or maybe when they're more independent to assisted living, what are some of the things that they need to know? Or maybe when they're more independent to assisted living, what are some of the things that they need to know? Or maybe when they're more independent to assisted living, what are some of the things that they need to know? Or maybe when they're more and not like, is there a time when you would actually want to help correct them and tell them, at some point you are going to want to just keep it soothing for them, but initially it sounds like when they're independent, you might be able to just be truthful with them.
Mhm. I've always been truthful,
Yeah.
my mom has mild cognitive impairment. And so I tell families all the time, my dad is 91. My dad has some confusion too. He is in early stages of dementia as well. My mom is 86. So I do this as a daughter as much as I do this professionally. And so I do walk down this path. So I actually will put a timer on my phone. It's easy as human beings. We don't ever want to watch somebody struggle. That's very difficult for us as parents. We don't want to see our children struggle. As adults, we don't want to see our parents struggle. And so I kind of have watched, or I'll count to myself. If my mom or my dad is still struggling after about a minute, then I'll help them. I'll finish a sentence for them. And I, as well, you sit there and say, well, a minute's not that long. It's a long time when you're watching your loved ones struggle, trying to find those words. Most people that I've seen will jump in after 5 seconds, after 10 seconds. And I watch my siblings do that with my mom, and she just gets angry as all get out. She just gets really angry. Like, I knew that word, I'm not stupid. Okay. So now my mom's mad, and now my sister's mad because she just wanted to help. So what I tend to tell families is give it at least 1 minute, and it'll be the longest minute of your life when you're trying to help somebody who's struggling. Sometimes they just go, oh, I don't know. And I said, oh, well, were you thinking of this? Oh yeah, that was the word I was thinking of. Okay, well then let me help you. And talk to your family members too. And I've done this with my mom, and I've said, a lot of times I see you struggling trying to find a word. Do you want help, or do you want to just figure it out on your own? And she says, well, no, let me try to figure it out on my own. Okay. And then sometimes she'll say, well, if I'm struggling too much, after what? After the third attempt, you want me to help you find the word? And if you're asking them and having that open communication with them, they might tell you. They might say, no, let me figure it out. Okay. So have that open dialogue with them too. It depends on the type of, and sometimes confusion could be they're not drinking enough water. Could be that they're not properly nourished. It could be that they're having an altercation with medication. So some of it could be easily fixed also, that can be contributing to some of this. So you have to watch all of those contributing factors. When is it time to go from IL to AL, from AL to memory care? That's a whole other separate presentation. But I would rely on the people who see them on a daily basis. So if there's people who are in IL, they will see like how many times are they coming down to the concierge desk? How many times do they see them, do certain things? They could probably tell you, well, we're seeing these types of things, repetitive things happen. There are a lot of different warning signs to tell families. I believe that, and that's a whole other separate presentation. But if somebody's getting up and coming down and asking the same question 10 times in one day, we might want to have a discussion. If somebody is getting up and walking out of a building and not being able to get back to a building, may want to have a discussion. And we can always start with a cognitive test and say, okay, here's a cognitive test, and here gives us a baseline. Now let's have another discussion. Does that help?
Yeah, I guess I think it would change depending on where they were at. Like I'm thinking oftentimes if they've lost a spouse, for example, and they're confused about that, depending on where they are in the stages, you might handle it differently, I suppose. If they're independent living and, you'd want to acknowledge it. And I guess I'll just wait and see, and it may be case by case.
It's very much case by case. And if you want to have more discussion about this, there is my information. I'm happy to have a discussion offline if you want to, because the loss of a spouse is a significant life event.
Mm-hmm.
And so if that has happened, that kind of puts spin on things. But I'm happy to have a further discussion with you. If you have a specific situation, I can provide further guidance and direction.
Thank you.
Mhm. Are there other questions that I can answer?
I have a question. My loved one gets very frustrated when he can't complete a simple task.
Mhm.
And I try to let him solve it on his own. But after a while, I finally said, well, do you need help? And I just don't know when to step in because he gets extremely frustrated, and I don't want that to happen.
Mhm.
But I also don't want to step in too soon.
Mhm.
Any thoughts about that?
Is so let me take, is it like can we take like brushing teeth as a task?
No, it's trying to get a slip of paper in an envelope, or trying to put a paper cover back on a book, or trying to unfold the newspaper or refold the newspaper. And you know, it's the fine motor skill kinds of things that he just can't do anymore, or getting a stamp off of, or a label off a, you know, a simple sticky. It's
Mhm.
that kind of thing, and he just gets so angry.
Mhm.
And I, you know, I don't want him to be in that state, but I
Right.
don't know when to step in. So
Okay, so a lot of times what I have talked to families about is, you know, when I start noticing the breathing change, you know, it's paying attention to those types of things. If their breathing starts changing and you start hearing just this like heavier breathing, they're starting to get more frustrated and more angry. And that's usually when I'll step in as even in my own building, you know, even with my mom and my dad, I'll just say, hey, what's going on? And they, oh, I can't get this done. Okay. What do you think the first step is? Well, the first step is to do this. So I go almost back to step by step by step. You know, like, okay, let's say he's trying to let's take the folding of a paper and putting it in an envelope. Okay. Well, the first step would be we have to fold this up. Okay, so the first step, we fold this side, then we fold this side. Okay, what's the second step? The second step is we get the envelope. Okay, is the envelope open? Yep. The third step is we just make sure that the paper is small enough to fit in the envelope. Okay, we got those steps down. And sometimes breaking it back down into smaller steps helps. Doesn't always help. I always say, does plan A always work in memory care? No. It's why there's 26 letters in the alphabet. We go to plan B, we go to plan C, we go to plan D. You get to letter Z, then go back to A, B, B, C, C. We always have to have a backup plan, then a backup plan to the backup plan, then a backup plan to the backup plan to the backup plan to the backup plan, because it doesn't always work that way. And sometimes we say, well, you know what? How about we just take a break? Let's just go get something to drink and then let's come back to it. It doesn't have to be solved right now. No, it doesn't have to be solved right now. Okay, let's just take a break and then let's come back to it. Okay, that sounds good. Or, you know, it's almost dinner time, or, you know what, the weather's nice. Let's go for a walk and then let's come back to it. You know, let's forget about it and then let's come back to it. Because even human behavior, when we can't figure something out, if we keep doing it, we get frustrated ourselves even without dementia. So always taking a break away from it and coming back to it. Okay, let's take a big deep breath and let's try it again. So sometimes that works and sometimes that doesn't, but I have found that if we can try to break it down into simple steps, or let's say, can we take a break and take a walk and come back to it? That sometimes helps. But what I will say is have a plan, have a backup plan, have a backup plan to the backup plan. But I always just watch for the breathing. And once the breathing changes and it's getting faster, it's getting heavier, or red face, that's also challenging. What I'll also tell you is this. This is helpful too. And this is humans in general. This is not just people with dementia. Whenever we get scared, frightened, overwhelmed, just exasperated, upset, frustrated, our brain releases a chemical. And typically, if you think about your own comfort foods, they'll typically land in something fatty, sugary, or salty. And if I were to ask everybody, like, what's your comfort food? What I'm going to hear is potato chips, pasta, ice cream, chocolate, wine, beer. But usually when I've gone around the room and asked that question, whether I'm in training or at a conference or whatever, that's typically I hear comfort foods will land in salty, sugary, or fatty. And the reason why is because when we get in those moods and we go for the ice cream or the chocolate or the potato chips or the French fries, we're satisfying that chemical in the brain. So when your spouse is trying to do that and he's getting frustrated and he's getting anxious and his breathing starts changing or his face starts getting red, that chemical is also being released in his brain. So a lot of times if you say, hey, let's take a break, does a bowl of ice cream sound good, or whatever his comfort food might be, once you satisfy that chemical in the brain, his anxiety and his stress will also go down. And then he will reapproach the task again, calmer. And that's any of us as human beings will do that.
Hey, Kathi, I think we got time for one more question, and this is a good one because we're just about at time. Well, we are a little bit over, folks, but this one's a good one. This is a good one to end on. Alice has a great question. How about tips for helping someone in early stage understand that it may be time to move to assisted living or memory care?
That is a great question. And wow, that is a great question. And I've gotten asked that a lot, is like, when is it time to do that? That's almost an entire new presentation on its own. But the best way, I will tell you, if it's somebody who's really not convinced that they're ready to go, I always say, let's start with a cognitive test. Because by being able to start with a cognitive test, we can say, here's your baseline. And then we kind of point out, I always say, and I go through normal conversation, and then I can point out, this is how many times they're repeating this, or this is some of the behaviors that we're seeing. And I always tell people who are living in independent living, who need to go to assisted living, or who are in assisted living, who need to go to memory care. You know, the goal here is to protect their dignity, and it is to respect them as individuals. When someone stays too long in independent living, or someone stays too long in AL that needs to go to memory care, they're living in a world that they no longer can understand. They're living in a world that they're no longer can maybe manipulate. It's almost like telling somebody, we're going to pick you up and land you in Russia, and good luck at surviving. You know, it's almost.
Oh, you muted yourself.
Oopsie.
Oh.
Kathi, you're on mute.
Ah, okay, there we go. I don't know how
There
that
we go.
happened. My computer's doing weird things. When we allow someone to live in the right environment at the right care level, they're much more successful. They're not as stressed. They have the right support system in place, and it protects their dignity, and we have them and we respect them at the level that they need to be. So those conversations are never easy. They're very challenging and difficult. And again, I know, because I've held those with 2 aging parents of my own, and siblings of my own. So if it has anything to do cognitively with somebody, on top of even their activities of daily living, I always start with cognitively. Let's start with a cognitive test, because those are the facts. That has nothing to do emotionally with anything. It has strictly to do with the facts. And then if it has anything physically, then let's look at how much can they do independently with their activities of daily living, and how much support and assistance do they need? Because then that goes back to, this is the facts, and we take the emotion right out of it.
Is that something that you administer, Kathi, or do you go to a neurologist or a primary care? I mean, where do you get a cognitive test like that?
You can, well, there's plenty of people at Balfour. Like, I know Laura can do a cognitive test. I can do a cognitive test. I think there's a couple of other people at Balfour that can do a cognitive test. Or A lot of times primary care physicians, I know they can do it, but I always tell people go to a neurologist's office too. If there's anything with dementia, neurologist's office can do it as well. But we can do simple cognitive tests at Balfour. There's plenty of people who are trained to do them at Balfour.
That's great.
So we can do the first step at Balfour and help families understand them and help the results, what they mean, and how to help have those conversations. Yes.
Yeah. And as COVID restrictions are lifting, it's becoming easier to allow folks to come in and visit with Kathi, or Kathi could, I mean, Kathi, you could ostensibly go to somebody, right? And have a conversation and assess that way.
Yep.
So,
now that COVID restrictions are lifting, I am now allowed to go to the lodge, the residence, the Lavender Farms, BRC. If people are comfortable with me coming to their homes, I'm happy to come visit you in your home. And so, yes, I'm happy to come to you as well.
that's really great. There are, why don't you talk about, can you talk about a little bit about what goes on at Cherrywood Village? Because you have, we're talking about COVID restrictions being lifted. I think you've got a couple of neat things that are starting to emerge as well. So
we do. We are starting next week. We get to open our day program again. So we're very excited about Cherrywood Village is a 52 bed, 100% memory care building. And so we have in the past had a day program that got shut down during COVID, which was unfortunate. We get to reopen the day program next week. So we're very excited about that. Individuals who are coming have to have had both of their COVID shots. That is an actual criteria to come. But we can absolutely, Laura Paniza can help anybody understand the day program. I'm happy to answer questions about the day program. And actually starting next week too, we are doing in-person tours again at Cherrywood. So we're very excited about this.
it's really great. It's great to be able to provide that service again for
Yes.
a lot of families, you know, so.
And we'll be opening indoor visitation for our families and residents, starting either by the end of this week or the first of next week. So our live entertainers are coming back next week too. So we're so excited about all the things that are happening at Cherrywood.
Thank you.
Okay. Any other questions?
Good night. See you.
Thank you for participating, everybody. Thanks for seeing. I hope you enjoyed your meals, those that received meals today. And looks like the great turnout at the lodge and residences. Thank you, everybody at the lodge. So, and we're happy to see you. Stay tuned. Well, hopefully if you want to participate in future webinars that we're going to be doing, as you can tell, Kathi is a treasure trove of information about memory care. So we're going to tee her up and have her share and teach us as much as possible going forward. So thank you very much, everybody, for participating.
Thank you for the food. It was good.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you, Kathi. Thank you, everyone.
She was excellent. I know, that was super informative. She was really